I'm feeling a little grumpy, but I figured I'll make a video anyway. I don't know what it is exactly, but I just feel bothered by reality right now. Perhaps after listening to that talk by those people who work in mental health about how they're all gung-ho about presenting different options about receiving people going through crisis, and maybe they want to come off their meds, and maybe they want to have less meds and different things like that, and presenting options, and just knowing they're going to go on that sort of crusade in a way. I feel like I want to participate, but at the same time I'm not allowed. I don't work for that part of the health authority. So them experiencing that for 1 week at a conference, now they get to go and talk and share and present to all their colleagues. And I've been living it for 5.5 years and then researching it for the last 2 years. And that's not even as long as so many people have. And where is people's opportunity to have a voice? There just really isn't that. And so I feel like I want to be like, yes, and jump for joy. But at the same time, I think like it's sad that they're the people that get to speak up about it and share that kind of perspective when they haven't lived through it. And I guess they're sharing it with their colleagues and everything, but it still bothers me a little bit because it's a chance to be like, maybe try not pathologizing so much. Maybe things might work a little bit better. And they're the ones that get to say that. And so I guess I should be happy in a way, but at the same time, I feel almost like being like, okay, good, it's in their hands. Maybe I don't have to do anything about it. Maybe I can just watch from the sidelines as it unfolds naturally, sort of naturally. I have a bit of a cold, but I'm talking to myself anyway. And I tried to go to the park, but then they were doing construction on the road right beside the park, so I couldn't turn in the parking lot, and I had to go all the way around the block to park in the park. And then I get in the park and all I can hear is the noise of that machine that's cutting a big slice in the pavement. And so I was at the park for a few minutes and then I just gave up and I left. There's nowhere to find peace and quiet around here. It's just so much noise. Like even a park during the weekdays is not a park. It's trucks backing up with their beep, 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 raking leaves and all this and bustle. It's not a peaceful place. It's not a natural park. There's people doing stuff to the park everywhere, as if the park can't take care of itself in some way. And then I was looking for this woman who presented her email, and so I was on the website of where she works or something, and I look, and it was funded by a family group whose son ended their life. And so on the page it says so-and-so committed suicide, and I'm thinking to myself, this is supposed to be like one of the most progressive places for mental health here, and they're using committed suicide as language on the main page of the website. And I'm like, that is sad. That stems from suicide being a crime, and so the more acceptable language nowadays is died by suicide or something like that. I don't know. But to say committed suicide, I just thought, geez. And then I went on the website of this poor boy, the foundation, and I was reading the story, and he was put on antidepressants weeks before he died. So a lot of times those make things worse and make a person actually go through with it. So for that to happen, so much funding to go towards creating more of the same types of interventions, it's just sad to me. It could have, I don't know, it's just really sad. It again is like, well, it was a mental illness, it was a brain disease, so we better make more of the interventions of the mental illness paradigm, never really taking into account what else could be going on, and not pathologizing distress of these poor teenagers. They're crying out for help and they can't even talk to their own parents because their parents are the ones that are putting this society on them. So again, I doubt my efforts in peer support. I feel like peer support, I'm not sure if it can coexist with the mental health system, and I've already said that. So I'm feeling slightly conflicted, and it could be partly PMS, partly a few things. And I'm not actually feeling upset about feeling distress. I'm just noticing. And I think it's okay, because why wouldn't I be slightly disturbed by some of those things? And on the website too of that poor boy, they said there was another suicide at the school that he was at the actual school at a later date. So it's to say that teenagers have mental illnesses is really sad. I don't really think that they should be pathologized and labeled in all those ways. Just like what I was saying yesterday, that poor transgender teen with all those labels in the article about them. It's trying to just program our brains to really think about people in those ways. It's really sad. And so maybe I'm a little bit sensitive about being pathologized myself. I just picked up my month supply of lithium, and I see myself as needing it because of all this GD traffic noise and working in the system, and there's all this crap that's going on. And I'm hoping that in a number of months my situation will be different. And also I was referred to as client, and that kind of stung a little bit. I just feel like I was put in my place. Like at the end of the day, I'm just a client. I know that's not true, but still, I should go back to sticks and stones. But again, by remaining in the system, working for the system, as part of the system, I'm reinforcing my role as client. And I know this will pass. It's just trying to inform me. I'm supposed to maybe go south in a couple months, and as it stands, I have a job that I don't think I can get away with leaving for several months at a time. And I almost feel like just being like, screw it, I'm out of here. I don't owe this system anything, and it's just maybe gonna take me down. I guess it's good to not always be more in my even appearing disposition all the time, because that's part of it. I don't really want to be even. I think it's a rich experience to be sort of in these distressing places, and the distress isn't like, oh, I have this problem from 10 years ago. It's like what they're doing to teenagers and the noise of society, and how parks aren't really parks, and they're not really like personal problems. And I was even thinking I could, at some point, when I'm in a bit of a quieter place, go off lithium and do videos about it and talk about what it's like, and maybe I'll be all over the place in a gong show, and that's okay too. That's part of the dialogue, the self-dialogue, just to talk about stuff as it comes up. And I actually have like 4 speaking engagements, if you want to call it that, coming up. 1 this week, and 2 this week, and 2 next week, and then the week after I have stand-up comedy. So it's interesting to be in this place of kind of like, just want to say screw you system and all you pathologizing people, and just drop it. And I sort of had this sense, and I've done it before, where I stayed too long in a job and it gets me in trouble. I wonder if I could just drop it and just say peace out. And I'm going to possibly make my decision more so coming up in the next couple of days. Because I don't know if I can stay here like this. I need peace and quiet to feel the 528 hertz of love energy. I guess I will talk more about stuff. I would like to be able to catch up, at least on the recent stuff that I've written within the last couple of months. And then I could go on to looking at some of the things I read in the past that people wrote, talk about that, as well as maybe going and looking at some of the stuff I wrote 5.5 years ago and starting to go back in time. So talking about stuff from now, but then going back, which is harvesting my original mania. So I haven't harvested it in terms of actually looking at what I wrote from back then. And I had the paper, a stack of paper like this big, but I chucked it out one day, but I scanned them all into PDF. So I have that to look at. Again, this is recontextualization for myself. It's mania literacy. It's map consciousness literacy. It's self-dialogue and a different narrative. I think map consciousness is an energetic process in consciousness. It's like a grand reset button. It resets our ego and we go back to the collective humanity that we started from. And then we start to learn how to use our brains again instead of having our brains used by dopamine. And a lot of times, most of the time, it ends up being a failure for the engine to start. And then the dopamine circuits don't really work well either. And then people are like, what do you mean you don't want to reach goals? What do you mean you just want to sit on the couch? There's no motivation, because the purpose was to screw up the dopamine circuit, because that is the circuit that is destroying the planet. And the universe is going to destroy us through this dopamine blowout versus actually having too many people with that dopamine circuit. And it wastes a lot of our energy to go back and try and fix people that their dopamine circuit got totally destroyed by the universe. And it was supposed to kickstart other circuits in the brain that would actually make the people that go through this process part of the solution to humanity. It's a different line of intelligence developing. It's part of the social fabric where certain people are supposed to have a certain function, and this is a new function, but we're turned into dysfunction. I feel like it's also giving us the impetus to create new language, a relational language, and there's epigenetics related to the relational language. So it's important for us to use different language, and relational language, the language of we and world centricity, in order to create this in the relational neural networks of the collective fabric. We need to start at least speaking to each other in these ways. Otherwise, we just start to speak the language of pathology and explain why our dopamine circuits aren't allowing us to be motivated and step back into a cog in the machine in society. Thoughts become viruses in our own voice. We record it from somewhere else and then we translate it into our voice, and then it's a virus. We think it's ourselves, it's using us. It's like a sonic delusion. It's like a sonic sleight of hand, a sonic sleight of voice. We're slighted by our own voice, and we don't realize we have a choice to not choose and be used by the voice in our head, which is our own voice, but it's not. The sonic delusion creates the images of the past. It's recalling past memories as self-medication with our own images, and those images are actually tied in with the emotional neuropeptides that are in our body, and we're addicted to those. Like, what the bleep do we know? We only know what we're addicted to, and we're addicted to dopamine, and we're addicted to neuropeptides of whatever emotion gives us the juice of dopamine. So we might have an emotion that we're always feeling hate, but that is actually giving us a reward. We're addicted to it. It's probably tied into the dopamine. So by hating other people, we actually feel superior and get some dopamine. I also wonder, if we didn't repeat our thoughts, how many thoughts would we actually think a day? Like 10? So a lot of our brain energy is being wasted by repetition. And I think frontality is tied to dopamine, and transient hypofrontality, the dopamine circuit subsides, and then the flow chemicals or the manic conscious neuropeptides are able to come into play. And the ego blocks what the heart sees, and I think this is actually quite necessary right now, because I've talked about before, if all of a sudden that ego barrier was removed from everyone, everyone would be in chaos and confusion. This dopamine ego provides some semblance of order just because we're only responding to a very small amount of the information in reality, the ones we've been programmed and conditioned into actually repeating due to their effect on our dopamine system. I feel like the silent mind is actually an elite human being, because they talk about elite athletes as in they can achieve flow states and high performance in their body. Well, then there must be elite human beings who don't need the prefrontal cortex and experience hypofrontality, and it's not just transient. It would actually be transient frontality, because it would only turn on the prefrontal cortex when absolutely necessary. Our brain and our intelligence and our consciousness would only use it when it's absolutely necessary. And what we think makes things salient, and what we think is tied into our dopamine and also the emotions that we're addicted to and the memories we've recorded and choose to replay on our mind screen. And that's what makes things salient in reality, but we're actually not seeing reality at all. And when we pick something out of reality that we've reacted to emotionally, we record it. And when we record it and we flash that image, our ego starts making stories about why it is that we feel that way. It gives justification. It strengthens the me versus you, the right versus wrong, and it gives that dopamine hit to feel entitled in a way. It's almost like emotions are songs, because when we feel it, the ego starts spinning sad songs and sad stories about what it is that we're feeling. Our consciousness starts to think that it's an ego because of that thinking process with our own voice. And it's a case of mistaken identity, but it's hard to realize that when the voice is in our own tone. In a way, insanity is the beginning of sanity. Other voices could be trying to save us from the trick of our own voice. I feel like in my first mania, it was a strong 528 hertz experience, and I can still sense it, and I can still go back and harvest it, because it's always there within me to harvest. And even though ego consciousness has come back in as a part of my life, I can still move toward that vision in time. I was thinking today that the ego is a widget, and manic consciousness or map consciousness, the whole spectrum, is a dashboard. I also realized too, the video I made, the fly whisperer, I think the reason the flies weren't afraid of me was because I was in 528 hertz, and that is the same frequency as nature, so they just saw me as the same as them. I think medications block the new circuits from being ignited. And I was also thinking about this 741 hertz of the ego mind prefrontal cortex frequency versus 528 hertz of love of the heart chakra. And I was thinking about how matter, the faster it vibrates, the more dense it is. So a rock, the molecules in a rock vibrate really fast, whereas the molecules in air vibrate slower. So in 741 hertz, that's vibrating a lot faster than 528. And the faster vibration implies more density. So this could also be one of the ways that it adds density to our system. And one of the ways that people have told me when I'm in that other consciousness, I'm taller because I'm not carrying that tension of the 741 hertz. So that frequency is actually a denser, faster frequency, and it's going to change my entire physical structure and I guess mental structure too. And that could also be part of the effect of gravity, and gravity feeling more dense. Actually, when I'm feeling like I'm hitting the lowest part of the scale of consciousness, I feel the heaviest. It feels like I'm decelerating on an elevator. I feel so heavy. And that could be even a different vibratory level, I'm not sure. And I was also thinking that our voice is euphoric sensation. So we're actually lacking the awareness that our voice is talking about the past, and it's keeping us in the past. So we're lacking euphoric sensation. Anything that moves us away from the present moment, even a fraction of a millimeter, is lacking euphoric sensation, unless we're actually using our brains. But if our brains are being used by these thoughts, they're actually totally warping our brains and warping us. It's interesting that we're warped by the sound of our own voice. And in that way, can we be equally as unwarped by the sound of our own voice by actually projecting our voice outward? And perhaps this is one of the ways that talk therapy is helpful, just to use one's own voice to express oneself. And that's why I'm doing self-dialogue. It's almost like dialogue too. It's a log, a journal. Our own voice is trauma. It's almost like if we didn't process that in the moment, our voice is always reminding us of it. Something's going to come up in our voice later and tell us. I feel like empathy makes us more able to respond because we can actually feel the situation. Dopamine likely decreases our empathy and makes us very linear and one-dimensional. We can't sense things other than as it has to do with our own personal pleasure, gratification, or avoiding pain, basically using people. And I think about Dr. David Hawkins' scale of consciousness from 0 to 1,000, and I wonder where psychiatry actually lies and the mental health paradigm. And then if I'm working in that, that's actually having an effect on my organism, my physiology, because I'm a tuner, like a radio tuner, and I'm picking up on the morphogenetic fields that I'm being exposed to. And because I've been given that empathetic lens through map consciousness, I'm affected even more. And I think it's actually good to be, pulled down a level or two, as not to go off into one's own personal ecstasy, because that's not ideal either. But I guess just being aware of it and just keeping track of the amount of time, because it could be more so the amount of time that is the accumulation. And I think being shown that suffering and experiencing a lot of suffering through the empathetic process is actually something from the field of love, because the field of love wants us to get a message that we are all connected and that we're all suffering. And it's sort of like a last-ditch effort in a way for love to give us that message. It's almost like the higher levels of consciousness that map consciousness shows us, it's showing us what's possible. And then when we come back down to these lower levels of guilt, shame, anger, everything like that, it's showing us what is actual, what's happening now. I think it's showing us a different scale. It's showing us something beyond personal reward and pleasure and avoiding pain. It's the collective, and it shows us that we really perceive the collective. So once we've been given that empathetic quality or line of intelligence, it's hard not to take action, and it's a different action. It's not an action of, oh, where do I get my next donut? It's something else. And I wonder why we should need any euphoric sensation. We only need that if we have thoughts in our head.